has asked me to turn it into a presentation for the 100th anniversary in September. So this is the presentation that I gave on September 11th. We're going to talk here about the Legion, highlights of Legion history. So in 1921, divine providence would use Frank Duff to start the Legion of Mary. However, the coming of the Legion was foreseen by others. And in fact, if you look in the handbook, there are quotes from 3 different holy people who kind of foresaw the Legion. Okay, they predated the Legion, but they foresaw it. So I'd like to look at those first. The first quote I want to look at from the handbook is from St. Louis Marie de Montfort, and we know him as the tutor of the Legion of Mary. He said of his writings on true devotion to Jesus through Mary this is what he wrote. I clearly foresee that raging beasts will come in fury to tear to pieces with their diabolical teeth this little book and him whom the Holy Spirit has used to write it, or at least to bury it in the darkness and silence of a coffer, that it might not appear. They will even attack and persecute those who read it and put it into practice. But what matter? So much the better. This vision encourages me and makes me hope for great success. That is to say, for a mighty legion of brave and valiant soldiers of Jesus and Mary, of both sexes, to fight the devil, the world, and corrupt nature in those more than ever perilous times that are to come. So that's in our handbook. Also in our handbook is a quote from Saint Therese of Lisieux, the little flower. She said, the legion of little souls, victims of merciful love, will become as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands of the seashore. It will be terrible to Satan. It will help the Blessed Virgin to crush his proud head completely. And the third quote is from Father Willie Doyle. Father William Doyle was a Jesuit priest who was killed in battle while working in the trenches as a chaplain during World War I. He's also quoted in the Legion Handbook saying this, I think it is evident that in these days of awful sin and hatred of God, our blessed Lord wants to gather around him a legion of chosen souls who will be devoted heart and soul to him and his interests, and upon whom he may always count for help and consolation. Souls who will not ask how much must I do, but rather how much can I do for his love. A legion of souls who will give and will not count the cost, whose only pain will be that they cannot do more and give more and suffer more for him who has done so much for them. In a word, souls who are not as the rest of men and who may be fools, perhaps in the eyes of the world, for their watchword is sacrifice and not self-comfort. So these 3 holy people were prophesying about the Legion, I believe. So in this talk, we're going to look at some highlights of our Legion history and see how the Holy Spirit has used the Legion of Mary to rise up and crush the head of the serpent in order to advance the reign of Christ during this past century and hopefully well into the next several centuries. Frank Duff joined the St. Vincent de Paul Society in 1913, and he began working with and serving the poor. In 1914, many poor Catholics were attending Protestant services so that they could receive a free breakfast. So Frank met Joe Gabbett, who was trying to counterattack the effects of these proselytizing centers, and he started a breakfast center of his own. So Frank became his assistant, and every Sunday they would serve breakfast and give a sermon on the Catholic faith. And in the meantime, Frank's spiritual life was developing. He had begun attending daily mass and praying the office and making retreats. So this picture here he is on one of the early retreats that he took. He was also introduced to de Montfort's book on true devotion to Jesus through Mary, but initially he struggled to grasp it. In 1916, his first booklet, Can We Be Saints, was published by the Catholic Truth Society of Ireland. In 1919, Frank was given Father DiConcilio's book called Knowledge of Mary, and that served to fill in gaps in his understanding of Our Lady, and it made true devotion clear to him. So he began to spread the word about this devotion, and he gathered a group of women together who were interested in studying and discussing de Montfort's writings. Around the same time, the St. Vincent de Paul Society, which was a men's group, was beginning to enlist the help of women in some of their apostolates. And the female volunteers became interested in some of the works that were traditionally done only by men. The women were looking for a means of living out the true devotion in a practical way in their lives. So a meeting was set up for September 7th, 1921, in Myra House in Dublin, and that's when the Legion of Mary was born. Those who were there didn't realize until later that it was actually the eve of Our Lady's Nativity. In attendance were Frank Duff, Father Tower, and 15 women, mostly young women, and Alice Keogh set up the first altar. It was a statue of Our Lady with the flowers and the candles. Of course, it didn't have the vexillum yet. You can still see it at the Concilium headquarters in Dublin. And the first president was Elizabeth Kerwin. So the meeting looked very similar to our meetings today. The altar was very similar, and people sitting around the table and praying. Now, the first work was visitation of patients in South Dublin Union Hospital, which was a 4,000-bed hospital for the poorest of the poor. They were mostly suffering from tuberculosis and cancer, and it was a really difficult environment for these young women to go into. The first name given to the new organization was the Association of Our Lady of Mercy. But as new branches were formed, each one adopted a title of Our Lady, like we do now with our Presidia. Every Presidium has a title of Our Lady. So once the first Curia was formed in 1924, the Legionaries made a novena in preparation for choosing a global name. And while looking at a beautiful image of Our Lady, the name Legion of Mary came to Frank Duff. And it turned out to be very providential because, as he said, it carried a whole sequence of consequences with it. The Roman terminology provided universal Latin terms. So once the Legion spread to other countries and the meetings were in other languages, everybody was still using the same Latin name. So it was very universal. And the model of the Roman Legion gave the structure of an army and the virtues of sacrifice, dedication, courage, and commitment for the legionaries to aspire to. By 1928, the Legion had begun to spread widely throughout the area, and the Bishop of Scotland asked Frank Duff to put something in writing, and that is what became the first Legion handbook. Now, the story of one of the earliest works of the Legion is told in the book Miracles on Tap, which was mentioned at dinner tonight, and it's for sale out there. And I really encourage you to get it and read it. It reads like a novel. It's an amazing story, but it's all true. Bentley Place was a red light district that had been in existence for over 200 years. The government had turned a blind eye to it, keeping it contained within an 8-block radius. And Frank Duff was concerned for the souls in that district where prostitution and murder were rampant and where the priests were afraid to go. So he recruited another legionary to go with him. Her name was Mrs. Plunkett. And they had the name of one girl, Mary Kate of number 8, and they set out to find her. So when they arrived at number 8, they found 5 women there, and among them was Mary Kate, who was on her deathbed. And so they asked if the priest had been there, and the women said, no, the priest won't come here. And they said, has she seen a doctor? No. So they called a cab, and they took her to the hospital. The doctor at the hospital said that if they had waited 1 more hour, she would have died. So Mary Kate ended up living for another 8 weeks. And during that time, the legionaries continued to visit her. And she died a very holy death. She was received into the church and died with the legionaries praying the rosary at her bedside. So the legionaries continued to visit Bentley Place every week in search of souls. And the whole story is told in the book Miracles on Tap, so you can read more about it. But what they did was they would set up these retreats so that the women would have some place to go and learn about their faith and kind of break away from that life. And they helped to provide both spiritual and practical ways for the women to leave their life of sin. So Regina Caeli Hostel was started in 1930, and it's still there in Dublin and welcomes single mothers and their children. And within 4 years of them starting these visits and these retreats, 200 to 250 girls had left Bentley Place, and the authorities were actually able to shut down the red light district. So it was really very miraculous. So the Legion continued to grow throughout Ireland and all through the 1920s. And then in 1928, it began in Scotland, and in 1929 in England. And in the early 30s, there was very rapid expansion to other parts of the world, beginning with India and Canada and the United States. So the first presidium in the United States began in New Mexico. And from there, the Legion sprang up in St. Louis, Chicago, Los Angeles. So this year is the 90th anniversary for the Legion in our country. In the 1940s and 1950s, there were two extremely pivotal players in the Legion, Edel Quinn and Alfie Lamb. Edel Mary Quinn was born on September 14th, 1907, which is the feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. And she was born in Cantor, County Cork, Ireland. She was the eldest of 5 children, and it was her dream to be a Poor Clare nun. But in 1932, right before she was about to enter the order, she was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and she was sent to Newcastle Sanatorium. So her illness made it impossible for her to pursue a religious vocation. But when she was well enough, she became more involved in the Legion of Mary. And in 1936, she volunteered to do extension work in Wales. Then when Bishop Heffernan, who was the Vicar Apostolic of Zanzibar, requested that the concilium send someone to organize the Legion of Mary in East Africa, Edel enthusiastically volunteered. So her appointment as envoy to East Africa was unanimously approved by concilium in September of 1936. But this approval happened only after much discussion. The Legion's spiritual director, Father McGuinness, initially gave strong reasons for not sending a girl in a delicate state of health to a place with such harsh conditions. And so Edel stood up and she stated that she was going into this with her eyes open, and she said she knew she wasn't going on a picnic. So Father McGuinness responded that she'd make a fine picnic for some wild animal in Africa. And Frank Duff called on everyone to see that the picnic would not be a substantial one. So that lightened the atmosphere. And when the vote was called, she was unanimously approved for the appointment. So Edel arrived in Nairobi on November 28th, 1936. And on December 8th already, she was holding an informational meeting that led to the formation of the first presidium, which they named Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception. She went on to found hundreds of presidia in Africa. She traveled through Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zanzibar, Nyasaland, Mauritius, a total area that was 20 times the size of Ireland. One of the key episodes during Edel's time in Africa was her interaction with Archbishop Ribéry, who was the apostolic delegate to Africa, who would later become the papal nuncio to China. And because of his experience with the Legion of Mary through Edel, he would be instrumental in having the Legion spread in China later on. Edel suffered many bouts of illness during her time in Africa, and she died in Nairobi on May 12, 1944. And she was buried in the habit of the Sisters of the Precious Blood, so she symbolically realized her dream of becoming a nun. The African legionaries erected a large Celtic cross over her grave, which reads, "She fulfilled her mission with such devotedness and courage as to stir every heart and to leave the Legion of Mary and Africa itself forever in her debt." Alphonsus Lamb was born on June 24th, 1932, the nativity of St. John the Baptist in Tullamore, Ireland, and he was the 8th child of a farmer and his wife. And like Edel, he felt called to a religious vocation, and he entered the novitiate of the Irish Christian Brothers at the age of 16. And there he was given the name Brother Ignatius. But because of his poor health, he was actually sent home at the age of 18. But it served a real important purpose for him. During his novitiate, Frank Duff came there and gave a presentation on the Legion, and that's how Alfie Lamb was exposed to the Legion of Mary. So when he got home, he joined the Legion. And in 1953, Alfie volunteered to go to South America as the Legion envoy. So he started the Legion in 12 dioceses, traveling through Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. But Alfie suffered ill health during his time in South America. And when he developed a stomach ulcer, the operation revealed cancer. So Alfie died on January 21st, 1959, at the age of 26. And he was buried in the Christian Brothers vault in Buenos Aires. So like Edel Quinn, he symbolically realized his dream of becoming a religious brother. Word of his death was sent to Dublin by telegram, simply saying, Alfie joined Edel today. And in response, Frank Duff wrote, one may institute a parallel between him and Edel. Each was wise and charming and lovable and without kinks. Each represented a frustrated vocation converted into a supreme triumph. In her case, it was accomplished in 8 years, and in his case, in 6. She is being acclaimed as a model for modern youth. He would fulfill the same role, and in a particular way for male youth. So that's what Frank Duff wrote soon after his death. Edel's cause for canonization was started in 1963, and she was declared venerable on December 31st, 1994 by Pope St. John Paul II, and Alfie's cause was begun in 1980. So one of the great chapters of Legion and church history is the story of the Legion of Mary in China. Father Edel McGrath was an Irish Columban priest who was sent as a missionary to North China in 1930. And he was given the responsibility of overseeing 24 missions. So he would travel through the area, visiting each one for about 3 days and then kind of circle back. And so he was very overworked. He begged his bishop for more priests and some nuns to help him with his work. And instead, the bishop sent him a Legion of Mary handbook. So Father was a little skeptical about it at first, but he recruited 6 men to form a presidium. And he was amazed at the success that they had with evangelization. So he began to recruit more, and soon he had 5 presidia assisting him in his parish, his whole big 24 parish area, spreading the faith. Now, with the rise of Mao Zedong and the threat of communism, Archbishop Riveri felt the need to raise up a spiritual army of lay people, since he knew it was likely that the communists would kill or imprison the clergy and send the missionaries away. So he sent for Father McGrath, and he asked his help in spreading the Legion throughout China. Father began in the University of Shanghai with the young people there, trying to recruit them. And within a year, there were 1,000 presidia in China. And within 2 years, that had doubled. So it was a very unique time of grace, both in the history of the Legion and the history of the church. With over 40,000 people evangelizing in China, communism could not take hold, and the Catholics were remaining loyal to Rome and resistant to the patriotic church. And as a result, the communists labeled the Legion of Mary public enemy number 1. Father was arrested by the Chinese people on September 7th, 1951, which was the 30th anniversary of the Legion. And he drew on the strength of his consecration to Jesus through Mary to endure 2 years and 8 months of torture and solitary confinement. And I encourage you to look him up on YouTube. You can hear his talks in his own words, and he tells stories of some of the really inspiring things that happened during his time in prison. He experienced many miracles during that time, and he even secretly instructed and baptized fellow prisoners. So he was released on the feast of St. Louis de Montfort, which was April 28, 1954. And he went on to spread and strengthen the Legion in England, the United States, the Philippines, and South Korea. So Legion membership in the Philippines has grown to 250,000, And in South Korea, the number of Catholics grew from 300,000 to 3 million. And the bishop there credits the evangelization of the Legion there for at least 80% of the converts that were gained. Now in these pictures here, you'll see up top, Father McGrath and Frank Duff. And this was a reception with the Lord Mayor when he came back from prison. And over here, Frank Duff is presenting a vexillum to Father when he came back. And then down here are photos from Father McGrath's visits to Philadelphia. So here he is with my dad, and over here with Father Lindaki and Monsignor Falls. So there was always a very close connection between Frank Duff and the Concilium and the Legion in Philadelphia. The official start of the Legion in Philadelphia happened in 1955 when my mom, that's her up there, was sent by Frank Duff to start the Legion here. So she initially worked with Florence Gorman, who was sent from St. Louis to help with the project. And they were welcomed into the Archdiocese by Archbishop O'Hara, and the Legion began to grow very quickly. The first meeting of the Philadelphia Curia, which would later become the Philadelphia Senatus, was held on October 16, 1955. And Sister Mary Phelps, my mom, was elected president. So it was initially directly attached to the Concilium and consisted of presidia that had been formed in the general Philadelphia area and Camden. Now, Father Ignatius Zoll, who you see here with Frank Duff and then over here at Mom and Dad's wedding, he was one of the early figures in the Legion in this area. He started one of the very first presidia in the diocese at St. Peter's Church in Reading, which was still part of Philadelphia. Allentown Diocese hadn't been formed yet. So it was in Reading in 1954. And he's the one who recruited my dad into the Legion. And the way the story goes was he was trying to get Dad to join the Legion, and he invited him several times and Dad wasn't coming. So Dad went to confession one day and Father Zoll said, for your penance, join the Legion of Mary. And he ended up being in the Legion until he died just a few years ago. So Father, you might want to use that sometime, okay? Father actually also accompanied Mom and Dad on their honeymoon, which my brother, who is has been a priest for 31 years, has yet to go on a honeymoon. So he doesn't quite understand how Fathers all got to do that. But Mom and Dad spent a week in Lourdes to consecrate their marriage to Our Lady, and then went to Dublin for 4 weeks and spent 4 weeks with Frank Duff studying the Legion of Mary. So Fathers all accompanied them for part of that. And it was a very blessed time. So the New York Senatus was established in November 1955. And in February of 1956, all of the presidia and councils in New Jersey and Pennsylvania became attached to New York. Bishop Benjamin was the first spiritual director of the Philadelphia Curia. But after his death, Archbishop Kroll appointed Father Thomas B. Falls as the spiritual director in 1961. And Monsignor Falls held this position for 37 years. And he was the spiritual director emeritus then from 1998 until his death in 2004. Father Francis Lindaki was the next spiritual director, and he was followed in recent years by Father Giuffre and Father McConan. The Philadelphia Curia was raised to a comitium in March of 1962, and it had 4 curiae directly attached to it. In September of 1963, the council was officially raised to a senatus with Brother Al Norell as its first president. And by this time, it had 7 curiae and 1 comitium. They were all in Pennsylvania attached to it. So the first Philadelphia Senatus meeting was held on February 9th, 1964, and the Senatus became directly attached to Dublin at that time. At the banquet following the first meeting, Father Reynolds, who is right here speaking, he was the spiritual director of the New York Senatus at the time. This is what he said. We in New York feel like parents seeing their children go off to start families of their own. It seems to us that the growth of the Legion in Philadelphia has been due primarily to 2 things. First, the very patient and painstaking work done by all the people involved. And second, your sense of responsibility, which has not been blind obedience, but a mature cooperation and an intelligent loyalty. Frank Duff wrote in anticipation of this event, I will pray that it will be a momentous day, not merely for America, but for the whole world. Each of us lives in the mystical body, and therefore a senatus is big in that same body. It is not a matter of influencing its own great area alone. So soon much of New Jersey was included in the senatus territory, and eventually 9 more comitia and 11 more curia would be formed. And the connection with Dublin remained strong, and the Philadelphia Senatus sent groups of legionaries to visit the concilium to learn more about the legion. So groups went in 1962, 64, 68, 71, and 81. And I was on the 1962 trip as a baby, which is when I had the opportunity to meet Frank Duff. The story there goes, Mom had been writing to him about me, and he was very anxious to meet me. He absolutely loved babies. And when we got there, I was asleep. And so he picked me up and woke me up, and I cried, and my mom never forgave me for that. But my mom was pregnant with my brother at the time, who ended up being named after Frank Duff. And my brother tells the story that when Frank Duff spoke, he left in my mother's womb. So this photo here was from the 62 trip. So you see Father Zoll, and there I am again, and my mom and my dad. This is Al Norell, who was the first president of the Philadelphia Senatus. So during the 1962 trip, my parents were having breakfast one day with Frank Duff when a telegram arrived for him from the Vatican, requesting 2 copies of the Legion of Mary handbook in every language for use by the committee working on the document on evangelization. And Frank Duff was then invited to the Second Vatican Council as a lay observer. When his presence was pointed out, 2,500 bishops rose and gave him a 5-minute standing ovation in recognition of his contribution to the church. Now, there have been several highlights in the history of the Philadelphia Senatus that have had ripple effects throughout the country and other parts of the Legion world. And I'd like to make note of 5 of these. One of the biggest was the Eucharistic Congress held in Philadelphia in 1976. Was anybody there? Okay, good. So some of you remember that. Yeah, it was amazing. It was really an incredible event because Catholics and legionaries from all over the world were gathering in Philadelphia. And it culminated in a Marian Mass, which was held at Veterans Stadium, and Bishop Fulton Sheen was the homilist. So this is a photo from that Mass. So thanks to Monsignor Charles Moss, who was a great Legion spiritual director, our Senatus was able to set up a Legion control center at Old St. Mary's in Philadelphia. And this became a central location for legionaries from around the world to gather and meet other legionaries and do some evangelization while they were in town for the Eucharistic Congress. So the school building was command central. And when legionaries would go into the building, they would first go to a briefing station. And there they would receive an assignment and be paired with a Legion partner and be given instructions and sacramentals. So I was there, I was 15 at the time, and I went to the briefing center, and I was paired with a woman from Seattle, Washington, and she and I went out and did street contact in one of the parks there, talking to the people. So it was really an amazing experience. But before going out, your next stop is the dressing room, because Monsignor Moss arranged for the Legion to have colonial costumes because we were celebrating the bicentennial in Philadelphia. So if we could get people to dress up, they were able to go out and, dressed up. We didn't get a lot of young men to do that. So this is, let's wait a minute, sorry about that. This is me and one of my fellow junior legionaries. This is my brother and my sister. This right here is Monsignor Moss. So he dressed up as well. Some of you may know Ada Mae Bell, who was a wonderful legionary in Philadelphia. So anyway, from there, the team would report to their assignment, and the assignment would be book barrow or tourist apostolate or nursing home or hospital visitation or even nighttime street apostolate. So then they would return to the debriefing center to make their report. So here's a little report of what happened. Local legionaries housed 719 legionaries from other areas, and 850 legionaries from 35 states came through the center and completed 1,200 assignments. Over 2,500 hours of work were completed and almost 25,000 contacts were made. Over 30,000 miraculous medals were distributed, and there were more than 200 possible converts. There were also 2 returns to the sacraments that happened right at the control center. So after the event, Frank Duff wrote this in a letter to my mom. Discussion of your mighty Congress has been the fashion. Going by what has been relayed to us, your Congress was the best ever from certain points of view. Certainly, it was unique from the aspect of apostleship. It would seem to be that the success of the apostolic side will constitute a new pattern for these events. A second highlight is the development of what Frank Duff referred to as the entertainment side of the Legion. So in 1961, my dad began putting Legion words to popular tunes. And he developed several Legion operettas that were performed by local Legion members for reunions and other Legion events. And on some of the Dublin trips in the early 60s, the Philadelphia Legionaries performed them for Frank Duff. And Frank Duff had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and he would record the operetta and listen to it over. He loved it. And so every time Legionaries from around the world came to visit, he'd make them sit down and listen to this recording of this operetta. So the songs were eventually collected and printed as the Legion Songbook, which is still available from the Sonatas. And in reference to the songbook, Frank Duff wrote this, and this is one of my favorite Legion quotes from Frank Duff. He says, "Most earnestly do we commend you in that. The Legion is not supposed to be a sour-faced affair, but a thing of real riotous happiness." So in this photo, this is a rehearsal, I think, for one of the operettas, because this is my dad conducting it, and you can just barely see he's holding me there because there's my little hand, so I'm probably asleep on his shoulder. And then the Legionaries are practicing for their performance in Dublin. So later on in the 1970s and 80s, this developed, and a group of Philadelphia Legionaries would take 2 weeks of their summer vacation traveling to other parts of the United States and Canada, and once to Ireland. And they would visit Legion councils and perform a Legion program with music and skits. So the program was called VFC, which stood for Vacationing for Christ. And at each Legion center visited, the Legionaries there would provide a meal for the travelers and a place for the VFCers to set up their sleeping bags. And it was a great Legion spirit builder for both those who were visited and those who were traveling. So in these photos here, here's Father Lindaki. And over here, there's Joan. Joan's here, right, today. So she's up there, and Jean Chernick and Mike Hawley. Down here are some real big Legion names in Philadelphia. So we have Mike Hawley and Francis Duquesne, Joe Walsh, Jean Chernick, Joanne Capone, Walter Brown, and that's my brother, Father Fran. So a lot of these people are no longer with us, but they did a great service to the Legion throughout the country, building spirit with these programs. It was really, really amazing. Another highlight was the PPC, which stands for Peregrinatio Pro Christo, and that's a 1 or 2 week trip to another area for the purpose of doing door-to-door evangelization. How many people have been on a PPC? Okay, good, so a few. So through the 1960s and 70s, Philadelphia Legionaries organized PPCs to Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Canada, Trinidad, and several of the states. And Monsignor Moss actually had a huge junior presidium, and he took his junior legionaries on PPC to England, Scotland, Germany, Iceland, and Italy. So a lot was happening back then. In the 1980s, Philadelphia began to organize a sort of local PPC, which was called Vacation Apostolate. And that would be 2 weeks in the summer at a different Philadelphia parish each summer. And the legionaries could participate for some or all of it, and they would get the opportunity to do what you do on PPC, going door to door each day and so forth. We also, at those Vacation Apostles, conducted a vacation Bible school for the children in the area. And we would end the 2 weeks with an open house where we would invite all the neighbors to come and tour the church. And we had legionaries at the different stations, like the baptismal font and the confessional and so forth, explaining the Catholic faith as the neighbors came through. So it was really great. Later, the evangelization day was developed. So a parish hosts a group of legionaries for mass and breakfast, and then there's a training session and teams go out visiting door to door in the area, returning for lunch and a meeting. So it's a really great way for legionaries who are not able to travel a distance or take, a week or 2 weeks out of their schedule to do this, to get the experience of what you do on PPC. And for those in the area, if you would like to try it, next Saturday, we're having one. So I brought some forms and I would love to sign some of you up. So we have an evangelization day in Bridgeport, Pennsylvania, only 20 minutes from here. And we would love to have you join. So that's next Saturday. Now, an important Legion event happened in 1979 when a team from Philadelphia, headed by Monsignor Moss, Walter Brown, Al Norell, and Bill Peffley, and also Bee Flanagan, she's not in the picture, went to Dublin to produce recorded interviews of Frank Duff. The TV team set up a makeshift studio where they spent time each day with Brother Duff, asking him questions about Legion history and spirituality. And these recordings are absolutely priceless because Brother Duff died just a year later. The text of the interviews are in the book, Frank Duff in His Own Words, which is for sale out there. But it was just amazing to actually have Brother Duff on film, talking about the Legion. So finally, one very significant highlight of Legion history also dates back to 1979, when Philadelphia was asked to take over the responsibility for the distribution of the Legion's magazine, Maria Legionis, in the United States and Canada. The magazine began in Dublin in 1937, and the main body of each issue is produced there still. But we add a 16-page North American supplement with articles and news items pertaining to the United States and Canada, and we also manage the North American subscriptions. So my dad was the first editor, and he continued in that position until his death in 2017. The production of the magazine expanded into Maria Legionis supplies, so we print many Legion books and leaflets, and a team of volunteers processes the orders and ships them out. And many of those items are on the table out there, and I do encourage you to look at them. There's some real treasures among them. So from 15 people at the first meeting in 1921, the Legion has grown to over 4 million active and 5 million auxiliary members, and has become the largest lay organization in the world. Just a few months after the start of the Legion, Frank Duff made a prophetic statement. He told his fellow members, "I believe you are destined to cover the entire world." When recounting this story later, he said that the legionaries laughed at him for 10 minutes. They never imagined that the Legion would spread to almost every country. Although it's beautiful to see the growth in numbers, even more important is the growth in holiness. The Legion has produced many saints over the last century. So not just our three causes, Frank Duff and Edel, Quinn and Lamb, but many, many others who have been formed by the Legion system, becoming living copies of Mary and quietly and faithfully allowing her to use them as her hands and feet, lips, heart, and mind as she continues to mother her son. Our Legion handbook refers to the Presidium as a local presence of Mary. And Frank Duff defined the Legion as Mary all over again, and also as Mary's up-to-date garment of flesh. At the canonization of St. Louis Marie de Montfort, a cardinal noted that the birth of Louis de Montfort was the beginning of a Marian age, which ushered in all the great modern manifestations of Mary, from Lourdes to Fatima, from the definition of the Immaculate Conception to the Legion of Mary. So we've been very blessed to be called to participate in Mary's spiritual presence in the world. And it's thanks to the legionaries who came before us and who faithfully followed the Legion system that we have this means to grow in holiness and to share with Our Lady in renewing the world for her Son, Jesus Christ. So as we celebrate this 100th birthday of the Legion, let's recommit to following the Legion system with fervent devotion so that Mary can continue to form Legion saints in future generations. Now, one of the songs in the Legion songbook that is the most appropriate for the 100th anniversary is called The 7th of September. And the tune is an Irish ballad called Kevin Barry, which not a lot of people are familiar with. But I found an old recording of my dad singing it. At one point, he stops and says something. Okay, so I'm going to play it right now for you. I'm going to show you the words up here because they're very, very appropriate for this 100th anniversary. And you can listen to him sing it. The words he's singing are a little different in some of the verses because he had updated it later, and this is a very old recording. Okay, but I think the words are very touching and very, very appropriate.
September, back in 1921, in the holy town of Dublin, something wondrous was begun. Round the simple altar at the closing of the day, of Mary's teacher, who had left the ground, with true devotion, with a faith so firm and sure. When the first of Legion ends, to the suffering and the poor, and return to the story of the things that they had seen. And they knew what they had witnessed was the presence of the Lord. Legionaries, and I just saw that verse. They know the words. Those were still legionaries. They know what was in store. But they bring their tiny legion with me reaching every shore. The Spirit of faith, which had sweetly led them on, spread to all the way countries like me. Thank God for this wonder, the region wonders to come. In the holy town of Dublin, 1921, the very altar in the weary world somewhere, every day and every moment, legionaries new, in flight with true devotion, with a faith so firm and sure. There were many legionaries to the suffering and return to the story of the Christ who lives in them. And the presence of that Lord as she henceforth.
on the table out there, I brought my dad's CDs. He has 4 albums of Mary songs on 2 CDs as a gift for you for the 100th birthday. So feel free to take a set. Make sure you take both of them. If you'd like to put a donation in to cover costs, that's fine, but not necessary at all. And happy birthday.